Hello and welcome back to Modern Jubilees. Today we're going to look at a very controversial portion of the Talmud that talks about 3-year-old girls. And this is all over X, and people are trying to really throw Jews under the rug as if Jews are perverts or the ancient Israelites condoned child rape, anything like that, God forbid, and that's very far from the truth. The reality is that through the Torah, through Bible, through Moses, through the Pentateuch, we learn about all of the laws of morality of God, and that's where we learn as Westerners. The norm of Western society comes from what we learn in the Bible is good or bad. What we learn in the Bible is incestuous relations or not. And when it comes to children, that's never been the norm, nor would it be. The reality is that back 2,000 years ago when the Talmud was being written, there was a very short life expectancy. And so some say it was 25, some say it was 35, which seems shocking to us now, but that was apparently the norm back then. And so it is normal that they would get married young, like maybe 12, 14, whatever. And that's fine. But when we're talking about really young people, we're going to look inside and see that nowhere does the Talmud condone this or ask people to do it at all. It's just talking about the reality of some technical situations. So first I went to Grok, and I asked Grok to please list all places in the Mishna and Talmud that a 3-year-old girl is mentioned. Why did I say the Mishnah and the Talmud? Because the Talmud, or the Gemara, is a commentary on the Mishnah. And the Mishnah is the basis of the oral law that dates back apparently to Moses. It's extremely ancient, and it was written down some 2,000 years ago, but it was kept as an oral tradition for many, many, many centuries before that. And the only reason they decided to write it down eventually was because basically of the destruction of the temples, and then people were being, flung all over as slaves and with nothing. And so they were afraid that basically if they didn't write it down and start preserving it in written form, it would be lost forever. And so the Mishnah was written down. It was decided that it needed to be written down. And then the Talmud comes to bring both the Mishnah and the Gemara to talk about all these issues that are within the oral tradition of the Mishnah. The Mishnah is the oral law, and that comes from Moses. So all this disrespect towards things like the Mishnah or the Talmud or these ancient texts is unfair. We have to look at them in their historical context, but we also have to look at the modern day and age. You do see in the Muslim world child brides. That is still a thing in the Muslim world, for sure. In the Jewish world, you do not see child brides. That's not a thing. So like we were saying, because of this short life expectancy, it is expected that the marital age would have been younger, but there is no condoning of anything with such young girls. So let's look inside and see. Let's see what Grok says, first of all, to start us off. The Mishna and Talmud, key texts in Jewish law and tradition, contain discussions that sometimes reference very young girls, including those aged 3 years and 1 day, primarily in the context of legal technicalities. So that's a reminder, the Talmud is a book of legal discourse. It's people chatting about the Mishnah in order to break it down, ask questions about it, understand it, bring in any verses or ancient stories like the Agadah into the mix. It's just a very, very long conversation about the Mishnah. These references often address edge cases in Jewish legal discussions and do not reflect normative practices, especially in modern contexts. Below is a list of specific places in the Mishnah and Talmud where a 3-year-old girl is mentioned based on available sources and provided search results. Note that these texts are often misunderstood or taken out of context, so I'll clarify the legal and historical context where relevant. The Mishnah, the foundational text of the oral Torah, contains several passages that mention a girl aged 3 years and 1 day, typically in discussions about betrothal, marriage, or the legal consequences of sexual acts. So there's Mishna Nedarim, which talks about purity and impurity, which is something, people are like, oh, the Jews are so weird. Everything we know about purity and impurity comes from God, comes from Moses, comes from Sinai. And so if you love God, believe in God, then, be careful what you consider so weird, because these are the laws of God. These are the laws of Moses. This is what we learned from God, and this is what God bestowed upon us and tasked us with keeping. But since the exile, the laws of purity and impurity are not really kept in the same way that they were back in the land of Israel. But it's an ideal that a lot of people hope to get back to, but it really does kind of involve the temple and the temple sacrifices, if not also the ability to, dip in a wellspring pretty often, depending on the circumstances. All right, so there's going to be Mishna Nedarim. Then there's Ketubot, which are the wedding contracts. So Mishna Nedarim 5:4, I'm going to check it out. I'm going to Sefaria. Sefaria is an amazing resource for all the ancient texts, and they're online, and a lot of it is translated into English, like maybe 80% of it. So we wanted to get Mishna Nedarim 5:4, and let's copy it in, and let's see what we can learn. All right, so let's look at this one. A girl who is 3 years and 1 day old, whose father arranged her betrothal. Why would a father arrange the betrothal of a 3-year-old girl? Only in extreme circumstances. So for example, maybe the girl's one of her parents passed and the other parent isn't sure how well they can take care of her, and they'd rather marry her off earlier. Or if they're in an area where there are a lot of pogroms and the girl's at risk, then they want to marry her off earlier. They want to give her to the right family earlier. They want to make a match earlier. It's not done today. It hasn't been done for an extremely long time. If it was ever done in antiquity under extreme circumstances, why not? Why shouldn't it be done? It was a more normal thing back then. Maybe the parents were very, very poor and they couldn't take care of her anymore. There are so many circumstances in which a family would want to have to get rid of their girl. They wouldn't want to, but they would have to. And the best way to do that is to marry her to somebody, as opposed to what is done until today, every single day, which is that people sell their kids into sex slavery. We see a lot of videos about this coming from India. We see a lot about this coming from the Hispanic world right now with all the gangs there. There's a lot of crazy stuff. We see this in the slave market of the Arab world. People sell little girls just for sex slavery. So here they're talking about marrying her off. So it's already a respectable conversation at the least, and it's clear that this wouldn't happen unless something extreme was going on, because it isn't normal, but they're talking about these fringe cases just to see, what are the laws around it, because that's what the Talmud is. It's a compilation of Jewish law and discussions like that. A girl who is 3 years and 1 day old, whose father arranged her betrothal, is betrothed through intercourse. It's not saying do intercourse with this girl. It's saying if someone does, it's considered marriage. So if there's a pogrom and someone did this to her, it's considered that something happened to her. We're going to see. But there are multiple ways to be considered married, and just one of them is through intercourse. There are other ways. But it's saying that it counts if she's 3 years and 1 day old, that she's betrothed through intercourse because she's 3 years and 1 day old. If she was 3 years or younger, then it wouldn't be considered such. Is that crazy? Let's just take a pause for a second. Is that crazy? Yeah, it's totally crazy. No one should do it. But it's saying if it happens, then it's considered that she's married to that person. So there are consequences to that situation that need to be then dealt with. It's not recommending it. It's not saying anyone should do it. It's not saying it's okay. It's not okay. And everyone recognizes that. And in a case where the childless husband of a girl 3 years and 1 day old dies, if his brother is the Yavam. Okay, so there's this thing where if there's a married couple and the man passes away, the husband, and they don't have any children, then the woman should really marry the husband's brother unless she doesn't want to or he doesn't want to. If she doesn't want to or he doesn't want to, there's a way to get out of it where she spits in his shoe. Essentially, it's this little ceremony where she says, no, I don't want you. And that's fine. But there is a thing that hey, this makes sense as a match. Are you guys interested? Okay, so in the case where the childless husband dies, if his brother engages in intercourse with her, he acquires her as his wife. Meaning, if this act occurs, then they're married. If he wanted to get out of it or she wants to get out of it, then it's another process. But if this occurred, then it should be known that this counts. Meaning, they're protecting her. Meaning, they're saying you can't just do whatever you want with kids. If you do anything to a kid, then you have to now take care of them for the rest of their lives, essentially. It's actually giving a reason not to do it. It's saying there are consequences to such a thing. We don't wants you to do this thing, and if you do it, then that's it, you're married. And so much so is she married that another man can't have intercourse with her, because then they would be having intercourse with a married woman and they would be liable. All this is actually amazing when you look at it with clear eyes, because when little girls have no one to account for them in the modern world, they're sold into sex slavery. There are sex slaves all over Africa and the Middle East and the world. They're all over. Millions and millions and millions of young girls are sold into sex slavery, and they're made to sleep with many men, and they're made to make money, and they're pimped out, and all this stuff happens. So this stuff 2,000 years ago is actually saying that, no, if anything happens to her, that's it. She's a married woman now. It's protecting her. This is actually protection for the girl. And so it's twisted and twisted and twisted. And I just realized, like, the people who are twisting this are themselves twisted. The people who are twisting this are just looking for any reason to hate the Jewish person without being able to see that the source of reality, of this truth that we have, the source of what we know to be right and wrong, is in God. And God gives the Bible to Moses, and the Bible is extrapolated through the oral Torah, and the oral Torah, the Mishnah, is extrapolated through the Gemara, and that's what it's talking about here. All right? And if she is impure due to menstruation, she imparts purity to one who engages in intercourse with her, and then renders impure all the layers of bedding, just like any woman. You can't just abuse a girl just because something happens. Maybe there was a pogrom and something happened, and so the father wanted to marry her off. Or maybe there was an issue, or maybe there was a plague, or maybe there was poverty, or whatever the issue was. She's being protected through this conversation. If she marries a priest, then she's normal wife of a priest. If she's not married and someone unfit for priesthood, like a mamzer, which is a bastard, engages in intercourse with her, like abuses her, then she can't marry a priest, but apparently she doesn't have to marry him and doesn't automatically marry him. So again, she's being protected. And if she is the daughter of a priest, then she'll no longer have the truma, and then she just won't marry a priest if this happens to her, but she doesn't have to marry that person. Finally, if one of all those with whom relations are forbidden, as stated in the Torah, engages in intercourse, they're executed for intercourse with her, and she is exempt because she's a minor. Because she's young, she's not held liable. But if anyone from all of the forbidden relations engages with her, then she is exempt and they are killed in court. They are executed. So again, this is protection of young girls. You don't see this level of protection in other societies. I don't see it in the Arab and Muslim society. I wish I did. I wish I did. But I don't. I don't see it in plenty of societies, but, you know, I've traveled a lot, I've seen a lot of societies, and one thing I know about the Jewish people is that they don't have terrible problems in these regards, and it's because God gave us the Torah with tons of laws so long ago and told us we have to keep these things. And so we do. If she's less than that age, then you leave her alone. She won't even remember it. It's a terrible thing that happened to her. Let's say there was a pogrom and something happened to her. Forget about it. She's considered still a virgin. She can still be married off as a virgin and get all the benefits. And we're just going to say it didn't happen, and we're just going to forget about it. And hopefully she'll forget about it too. So that is the state of the situation, the legal situation for young girls, and how to protect them from sex slavery, which is something extremely common in this world. And anyone who's honest with themselves or looks it up can learn that. Next one, Mishna Ketubot 1, 2-3. All right, so now we're talking about marriage contracts. These are Mishnahs, by the way. This is just the law we're looking at right now, not the Talmud. So that was very clear from reading the Mishnah just now in Niddah, that was about protection of young girls. That was very clear to me. Very clear. Mishna Ketubot, this is about the wedding contracts. That is very common in patriarchal societies, the idea that, like, you get what you pay for, the virgin is worth more, and this is just classic and actually an important thing to talk about, but we don't talk about those things enough, and the importance of chastity, of thinking about marriage from a young age, thinking about having children from a young age. That's actually much more important than we give it credit for in the modern world. All right, with regard to a virgin, her marriage contract is 200 dinar. With regard to a widow, it's 100. With regard to a virgin who is a widow, a divorcee, or a chalutza, for all of these, their marriage contract is 200 and they're subject to a claim concerning their virginity. With regard to an adult man who engaged in intercourse with a minor girl less than 3 years old or a minor boy less than 9 years old, who engaged in intercourse with an adult woman, or a woman who had her hymen ruptured by wood or any other foreign object. Now, how do you think this happens? This happens through pogroms. This happens in the modern world. This happened on October 7th. This is what happens. This is what they do. This is what they do. This is what heathens do when they have these pogroms in Africa, when the Islamists slaughter hundreds and hundreds of Christians, just slaughter them for no reason. The Christians didn't come and hurt them, nothing. They go and they conquer them and they abuse them. This happens until the current world. Nobody would do this to their own people. But this is something that cruel people do. This is something we saw on October 7th. That there was a boy who was raped and then the gun was left up his anus after they shot him. This is in that report that we read together. This is something that's done. This is something that cruel and terrible people do. This is not saying that anyone in the Jewish world would ever, ever, ever in a million years consider doing this to their own family member. That's not what this is. So this is saying, let's say an adult man engaged in intercourse or a woman's hymen was ruptured by wood or any other foreign object. For all these women, their marriage contract is 200 dinars, as their legal status is that of a virgin. They're protecting these women who were abused in pogroms. That's what this is about. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir, and the rabbis say the marriage contract of a woman whose hymen was ruptured by wood is 100 dinars, as physically her hymen is not intact, she is no longer a virgin. So they're having conversation. They're having conversation about what's also fair to the man who's going to be marrying her after she was abused in this way. He's marrying her, and now what is the contract going to be? What does he have to pay to her family? That's the conversation. It's not that crazy. Not that crazy at all. I hope this helped to just see like what we're actually talking about here. This is about girls who had been abused. This is not in any way condoning that kind of behavior. Not in any way. Never do you see that. Never is that the case. Okay, so just to wrap up this video, we're not going to go into the Talmud portions. I just scrolled through them here on Grok. None of them add anything to what we already looked at in the Mishnah. And addressing misinterpretations, let's continue here real quick. When these passages are raised by critics, as seen in some ex-posts, the response should emphasize, context. These are legal discussions, not endorsements. The Talmud frowns on such practices, i.e. in Kiddushin and in Niddah. Like we were saying, this was not normal, this was not accepted, this was not seen as good. None of these were in the forms of command. The translations are a little bit confusing. It's not say, consummate the marriage with relations. That's not what it's saying. It's saying relations would consummate a marriage, even with a girl as young as 3 years and 1 day. God forbid. Historical norms. Early betrothals were a societal norm, not unique to Judaism, but that's more like from 12 and on, and not younger than that. Younger than that, there's an issue, something happened. Not unique to Judaism, but the Talmud sought to regulate and limit harm. Jewish law today follows civil laws which universally prohibit child marriage and abuse. Websites like talmud.faithweb.com or safari.org provide accurate translations and explanations to counter misinformation. All right, that wraps up the video. Thank you for watching and for listening. This is an important topic. In general, when people are studying Talmud and when the people were writing the Talmud and the Mishnah, it was from a legalistic mindset. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't like, adding lots of context. It wasn't going to tell you all the circumstances. How did this wood get into this woman? Like, nobody has to say it because it's implied and it's understood. And so I hope that I brought some clarity to these ancient texts today. And let us know if you have any questions or comments, or if there's any other passages you would like to be unpacked. Bless you all for watching and listening and caring about these topics. Many, many blessings to you and yours. Wishing all the very best, and let's pray for all the young women and young men and people who are still enslaved to this day and who are not protected by any laws whatsoever and their societies do not protect them, and their societies are not creating laws to protect them, but rather are turning a blind eye. So 2,000 years ago, the Jewish society gave a lot of attention to this topic, and these are good ways to protect young people who end up on their own, especially young girls who end up on their own. And I hope I brought clarity. So have a great day, and we'll see you next time.